system.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp podcast. I am here with Steve,
Hello.
as always, and today we're going to be talking second round series and some other random NHL news that has come up. So I guess we'll start with the big news of last week, which was the Kasperi Kapanen trade from the Toronto Maple Leafs to the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Maple Leafs sent Kasperi Kapanen, Pontus Aberg, who's a guy that's playing in the KHL right now, and defenseman Jesper Lindgren to the Pittsburgh Penguins for Evan Rodriguez, David Warsofsky, Philip Hollander, and the 2020 first-round pick, which is 15th overall. If I remember correctly, one of the guys involved in this trade is just like a career AHLer. I think the other guy was a second-round pick a couple of years ago. So essentially, it turns out to be just Kapanen for Rodriguez, a former second-round pick, and a first-round pick for this year.
Yeah.
What do you make of this trade? Do you think this is a hockey trade? Do you think that there's some sort? Because I honestly think this is a cap dump by the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I'm really not thrilled. I'm not in love with this trade from Toronto, but I want to hear your thoughts on it.
I mean, it's definitely a cap, dump. They had to get rid of somebody, and Kapanen just happened to be the odd man out, outside of like their big five, right? So, and there's no reason to trade a guy like Zach Hyman to move Kasperi Kapanen into your top six, because Hyman gets the job done, and he's making like no money at all. Like, you're essentially replace Kapanen with Rodriguez in the lineup, which is okay. I mean, like, Rodriguez isn't as good as Kapanen, but like, he's good in that position, so it's a trade-off, I guess. But the big thing essentially is Kapanen for that 15th overall pick is pretty much what the big hauls were here.
Yeah, I mean, from the Toronto Maple Leafs perspective, Kasperi Kapanen had been pushing for a top six role for the last few seasons, and something that he just found himself on the outside of a lot. I know he played on the second line a couple times this year, but more often than not, he found himself playing third line minutes. And I mean, I honestly genuinely think he's good enough to play second line. Like, to me, he's like a second line speedster that can put in 20 goals. He's kind of like what Jason Zucker is right now for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Like, he's just a fast winger that can put the puck in the back of the net if you set him up the right way.
Yeah.
And he found himself on the outside of the top six of the Toronto Maple Leafs a lot. And I guess that they're really dedicated to not moving any of those four contracts that they have between their big four plus Morgan Riley. The reason I said I'm not in love with this trade is just because I'm not in love with it yet. I want to see what they do with that cap room. I want to see what they do with that 15th overall pick, because I can't imagine that they're going to use that. That there has to be a trade follow-up to this, right? Like, that 15th has to be going to a team that has a defenseman to offer them, right? Like, there's got to be some sort of follow-up to this trade.
Or do they just really want to try to draft somebody to play? I mean, I don't think there's anybody really around 15th overall that fits their description for them, but they might be really high on somebody that's in and around that area of the draft. I really don't know.
I think that they need to take that 15th pick and flip it into either like two pieces for their third line that are like hard hitting, like nose to the grindstone, like Kyle Clifford type players, or they need to flip it and turn it into a defenseman. I think if they take that pick, it's kind of a waste almost, just because, let's be honest here, 3 straight years of, well, they didn't even make the first round this year. 2 first-round exits and a loss in the qualifiers is not good enough. And they're not a team that you can look at and be like, well, they're still young. They still got potential, because, yes, while a lot of them are still young, they're only going to keep running into these cap problems, like, over and over and over as their young guys get better and better and better and their contracts come up. They're going to run into these cap problems. Like Rasmus Sandin, when his contract comes up, is going to need like a contract for, depending on if he still keeps growing the way he's playing, he's probably going to be looking for like $4 million when his contract comes up on a conservative side. Guys like Justin Holl and Travis Dermott, when their contracts are up, they're going to need, renewals. So the issue with the Maple Leafs is, while they're young, like, they're just going to keep butting up against that cap ceiling. So really every year kind of matters to them. And I can't imagine that they take a project at 15th overall that's going to take 4 to 5 years to get into the NHL, when they could flip that into a rock-steady defenseman.
Right, yeah.
Because they only have one guy under contract. I mean,
his name's Morgan Riley.
I'm assuming that they're going to bring back Jake Muzzin. I don't really see any reason not to. I'm assuming that they're probably not going to bring back Tyson Berry. He's probably gone.
As much as they would probably want to.
I don't think he wants to play there anymore, to be honest with you. Like, after the crucifying he got this year at the hands of the media there.
I think that's the biggest issue now with the Maple Leafs, honestly, isn't the team environment, is the media environment that surrounds this team is going to be a big detriment to probably them attracting any other free agents going forward. I mean, it's almost like the instant that John Tavares, the ink dried on the John Tavares contract, like every media personality just turned their attention to Toronto and hasn't looked back.
I can understand it to a certain extent because this is a fan base that has just gotten year after year of first round exits at the hands of the Boston Bruins, mediocre playoff, not even runs, running into a brick wall in the first round. They get eliminated by the Columbus Blue Jackets this year. This is a team that's been, quote unquote, on the cusp of a deep cup run for like 5 years now. And so the impatience level is probably really high in a lot of the fans, which then translates to the media because the media feeds off that, right? The media wants to write those sensationalist articles to get those clicks because they know the fans are just like waiting to jump the gun at any given moment. If I'm the Toronto Maple Leafs, this pick has got to go, and it's got to be a defenseman that's coming back. I mean, you have to find a way to get a defensive defenseman back into this system. As much as Kyle Dubas doesn't want to admit that he was wrong, very clearly having Morgan Rielly and Tyson Berry, along with Travis Dermott and Justin Holl, who were like more offensive than defensive, and then having one actual defensive defenseman on the roster out of 6 didn't work. Especially when he got hurt, and then you had 0 defensive defensemen on the roster. There's got to be a move made here. I think if they keep this pick, it's a complete waste, in my opinion. Like, why would you move a good third liner out just to take some project that's going to take 5 years to get here?
I agree. I mean, well, what do you think? I mean, who's really on the market for them that you think that they could flip that 15th overall pick into?
I mean, we've talked about it a ton, and we talked about it a lot with the Rangers, but I really think that they should be going after somebody like Hampus Lindholm. Like, he's in that perfect 26 to 28 year range where he's young enough that he can play the next 5 years with the Maple Leafs, but he's old enough where he's kind of just wasting his time on the Anaheim Ducks because, let's be real here, they're not going anywhere in the next 5 years. And he's in that perfect, like, I want to compete now, and I want to be on a competing team, and he's on a team that's not competing. He's out of conference, so anybody you trade to, from the Toronto Maple Leafs to the Anaheim Ducks, you're not going to have to deal with until you get back to the Stanley Cup Finals if they ever get there. I think that they're perfect trading partners. I mean, I know we talked about them a lot with the New York Rangers when I said that they should trade down. Or even if you could try to see the Golden Knights, they have a glut on defense right now between guys like Alec Martinez and Shea Theodore, who Shea Theodore is looking like he's going to need a bigger role next year. But is he going to get that amount of time on the Vegas Golden Knights? Maybe there's a trade to be made there between those two teams. I just think, it's kind of a waste. You trade away a good third liner who's not making that much money. He was only making, I think, $3.5 million. To do what? To take a piece that's not going to be here for the next 5 years? Like, this is a team that, in theory, should be competing for a Stanley Cup every single season.
Well, with the $40 million they spent on those forwards, they 100% should be.
Well, what do you make of this trade from the perspective of the Pittsburgh Penguins?
Well, I mean, it really makes the Penguins' top 6 a little more, like, balanced and lethal than it had been. Because I think you can put a guy like Patrick Hornquist now on the third line and really let him play with like Jared McCann, or I really don't,
like
maybe
Teddy Bluger,
Teddy Bluger, yeah. And your top 6 can be Crosby, Gensel, Haula, Malkin,
Zucker if he resigns,
Zucker, and Kasperi Kapanen.
Yeah, I think it addresses a major issue that they had specifically against the Montreal Canadiens, which is when their top pieces weren't producing, nobody was producing. And the Maple Leafs the Pittsburgh Penguins have always been a top-heavy team, just from the nature of having 2 of the best centers to play in the NHL. But this adds a little bit more balance to the lineup. It adds a little bit more speed to the lineup, which is something that they were clearly going after with the Jason Zucker trade. Again, like him and Kasperi Kapanen are like cut from the same mold. Speedy wingers who can put the puck in the back of the net if you need them to. And Kapanen can play either the left or the right side. He can play left wing, right wing if you need him to. I think it gives the Maple Leafs options. He's a very nice utility player for them. It gives the Pittsburgh Penguins options. And I like the trade from their perspective. They don't need a 15th overall pick. they've shown that as long as 87 and 71 are suiting up for the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're going to try to go and win the Stanley Cup every single season. And why wouldn't you? So what do you need a 15th overall pick for? I mean, sure, you're going to pay the price in the long run. You're going to have a Detroit Red Wings style rebuild over time. But why would you not go for another Stanley Cup while you have two of the best players to ever lace up the skates?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same. They're both teams are in really similar positions in that, like, the Maple Leafs should have the same mentality of we're going to compete for a Stanley Cup every single season whenever we have 34 and 91 wearing the skates. But it seems that, like, they seem to be having some real issues. Like, they seem really unsure of what they want, what they need to do going forward, which is obviously address their defensive deficiencies. But trading for, like you said, the trading for the 15th overall pick doesn't really answer any questions. It just kind of created more questions about what they're trying to do. So I don't know.
Like I said, if there's not a follow-up to this trade, first of all, I'll be shocked, and second of all, I'll be incredibly disappointed. It's hard to judge this trade just yet because the draft hasn't come about, but should the draft come about and the Toronto Maple Leafs contingency walks on that stage to make that 15th overall pick, this whole trade will have been for nothing. Because you get a nice prospect out of it, sure, a former second-round pick. You get Evan Rodriguez, who's, he's one of those type of guys you can throw in the bottom six, like I said, a little bit of grit, but he's more of a speedy winger from what I understand. But if there's not a follow-up to this, it kind of is just like you didn't move the needle. The needle stayed in the same place. In fact, the needle might have gone backwards a little bit. Because now the very thing that you've pressed so hard to do, which is score goals, just got a little bit harder. So there has to be, in my mind, there has to be a follow-up to this trade. It's got to be in the works somewhere. I think that Kyle Dubas is smart enough to recognize, as much as as much as he wants to be on the cutting edge and on that cusp of, the next generation of hockey analytics, I think he's a smart enough guy to realize, like, look, getting our shit kicked in by the Columbus Blue Jackets in the first round is not really what we aim to do here, and it's kind of embarrassing, so maybe this experiment has failed.
Maybe.
Well,
I mean, we saw it in Arizona. I mean, John Chaika and Kyle Dubas are cut from, like, the same cloth, and they were having they have to answer a lot of the same questions that we're asking about the Maple Leafs. It's just
what's next?
Yeah, like, what is the plan here? Because, like, clearly the analytics haven't answered any of the questions you guys had.
Hockey is not baseball. What guys like Billy Beane did with the Oakland Athletics is nothing short of genius, right? Essentially buying wins in MLB was nothing short of spectacular at his time. The problem is baseball is a sequence of plays. There's a pitch, and you can control every pitch, and you can control every play, and it's a sequence of this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. Hockey is as a flow, and you need those guys that are going to get out there and make that big block. Like we saw, if you watch Game 1 between the Islanders and the Flyers, Andy Green saved a goal with his back skate. And that 100% would have ended up in the net, and it would have been a 2-2 hockey game at that point. You need guys like to make small little plays like that. And you can't quantify that on your analytics because all that goes down as is a block shot. And that doesn't show up on the analytics. So a guy like Kyle Dubas might look at Andy Green and be like, well, he's over the hill and, like, he doesn't really, generate a lot of puck control, so, like, I don't want him. But at the end of the day, he made a game-saving play. And a guy like Kyle Dubas might not recognize that. Or, he might not look at a guy like, I don't know, we'll say, he might not look at a guy like Brendan Lemieux for the New York Rangers. And he might look at him and be like, well, he throws a lot of hits, but, like, his puck possession isn't great, and, like, he doesn't put up a lot of points. It's like, okay, but what about when he goes and, like, absolutely freight trains the other team's best player? Everybody on the bench is jumping up and, like, hollering and hooting and getting, the energy going. That doesn't show up on a stat sheet. Decibels per minute of the heart rate of your teammates doesn't show up on a stat sheet, but it matters in hockey a lot.
Well, I think that kind of goes hand in hand in what we see with the Maple Leafs. It's a very, like, clinical approach from their GM, and the bench is kind of clinical and very professional, and nobody really says anything. But, like, that's hockey. Like, hockey isn't a clinical sport, and, like, the eye test does say a lot.
Like, there's a big reason why John Tavares might go out and put up 40 more points than Jamie Benn, but Jamie Benn overall is probably a more effective captain and a leader because he'll throw that big hit. He'll get into that fight. He'll defend his teammates with his fists. Whereas John Tavares, like, if he's not scoring, what's he doing to motivate the bench? Come on, boys, let's go get it done. Jamie Benn's like, listen, we're down 3-0. I haven't done anything all night. I'm going to go absolutely put Sidney Crosby through the boards and see what I can start.
Yeah.
And that matters. And the Leafs don't have any of that.
I think, they don't. A lot of their players are, like, the team itself is very one-dimensional. It's very, like, we're going to just skate and hold on to the puck and hope for the best. And
Kyle Dubas' whole thing is, like, our team toughness is going to come from our power play. That's where, we're going to force the other team into taking penalties. If they want to run us through the boards and take a penalty, we're going to score on the power play and make them pay. It's like, yeah, great. Your power play is clicking at 25%. So 1 out of every 4 times you get a power play, you might score. What happens if you get 2 power plays in a game, you go 0 for 2, and you just lost 3-0? What was the whole point?
And you got bullied for it.
Like, what was the point?
Well, this is it. They're soft.
Yeah, so my overall thoughts on the trade is there has to be a follow-up to this, otherwise what was the point? And any other news you wanted to talk about before we started?
Not particularly.
Just like a little note, I guess. Todd Reirden got canned by the Washington Capitals. Not surprised. They have to find a new coach. But speaking of series that are going on, let's start with the ones that are going on tonight. We're recording this at about 7 o'clock tonight. And one of the series that's going on, that's playing actually on TV right now, is Boston Tampa Bay. Kind of give me your overall thoughts on the series so far. Obviously, 3-1 series lead for the Lightning. What are your overall thoughts? Do you think by the time we're done recording this, like, Boston, this game will be over, so we'll know or not? But let's say, for argument's sake, Boston loses to Tampa Bay. Like, does this mean anything to them? What does that mean as far as the franchise goes? Like, what are your thoughts on this series overall?
I mean, no matter how this goes, the Boston Bruins have a lot of soul searching they're going to have to do in the meantime. Like, well, not in the meantime, but in the aftermath of whatever their playoff run is, right? They're going to have to answer some questions. But I think those questions are a lot easier to answer when, you're a Stanley Cup champion. If, like, you get there. Like, swallowing the bitter pill of having to let Torrey Krug potentially walk is a lot easier if, you could say, well, at least we got a Stanley Cup out of it. But if you go down in 5-6 games to the Tampa Bay Lightning, I mean, I don't know if you can come back and say you're going to be better next season because of, like, where they are with the cap. So this kind of might be it for them, and I guess, like, to their detriment, the Tampa Bay Lightning also just got significantly better this year and are going to stay significantly better going forward. I mean, they don't even have Steven Stamkos back yet. Like,
yeah, I mean, I was gonna say that there's no shame in losing to the Tampa Bay Lightning, right? They're a fantastic hockey team. They've been a team that a lot of people have been saying should be competing for a cup for, like, the last 3 or 4 seasons. Like, they were in a long time. Like, they were in the same place the Maple Leafs were, like, first or second round every year, and everyone was like, why? Like, where are they going? Like, obviously they went to the Stanley Cup Finals in 2015 against the Blackhawks. So they've been there. They've had their deep runs, but they just seem to kind of always perennially underachieve. And a lot of people have been questioning, like, are they really this good? And then this year it really does look like the answer is yes. Like, they're really a legitimate hockey club. I think the issue for the Bruins at this point is just their age. Like, a lot of their core pieces up front aren't getting any younger. Like, at some point, you're losing Zdeno Chara. Like, you just have to admit that. Bergeron's not getting any younger. Marchand's not getting any younger. Krejci's not getting any younger. Sure, you have a nice, like, young, pieces in, like, Charlie McAvoy, Torrey Krug, although Krug's probably going to walk. David Pastrnak's not that old, but Tuukka Rask isn't getting any younger. I think at this point for this core of the Boston Bruins, it's either cup or bust every year. If you didn't win the cup, it wasn't really a successful season because they're at that peak right now. And if they go out in this series, like you said, I don't really see this team getting any better. They're just going to have to keep staying the course because they proved last year that they are a Stanley Cup contender. they're just gonna have to stay the course, find a replacement for some of the guys they can't afford anymore, and just hope that the regression from their older pieces isn't too much. I do want to ask you though, do you think this series plays out any differently if Tuukka Rask is in the net? And let's assume he's like, mentally there, Tuukka Rask. Not to say he's like unstable, but like clearly he was checked out, right?
I mean, I was thinking the same thing to myself just now. Like, would this play out any differently with Tuukka Rask? And I mean, the games might be a little closer, but I still think that the Lightning would find themselves in the driver's seat. From what I understand, like I haven't seen all of the games, full disclosure. But from what I understand, they've handled the Bruins pretty easily for the most part.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, look, let's be real here. You don't get blown out 7-1 and blame your goaltenders. Like, your goaltenders can let in whatever goals that they want in a 7-1 loss. The question then becomes, what are you doing on defense, right? And in defense of Yaroslav Halak, has he played as good as he did in a regular season? I don't think so. I mean, there's a couple of goals here and there that he would definitely want back, and I think that he definitely could have some of these goals. That being said, I don't think Tuukka Rask really changes anything because the Lightning have controlled the flow of play so effectively. If it was like the Bruins were putting up like 35 shots a night, only giving up like 20, and Halak was like booting 1 or 2 of those 20 and they were losing by a goal or two, then you could argue like, well, Rask would have negated the situation. But the Lightning are controlling play for the most part. They're dictating the pace of play. They're getting physical with the Boston Bruins, which I don't think the Bruins are really used to many teams being able to keep up with them physically, but they're getting physical with the Bruins. They're skating with the Bruins in their top 6. And I tend to look at this series as more of the Lightning coming of age as opposed to wrong. I just think that this is a different Lightning team that a lot of people weren't expecting. And, like I said, there's no shame in losing to a team like that. I think this is a series where the Lightning are winning it as opposed to the Bruins losing it necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree with that. I mean, the Bruins have played well. They've looked pretty good through these games. I mean, for what it's worth, but the Lightning just look better. I mean, I don't...
Yeah, and like I said, you don't get blown out 7-1. I mean, let's be real here. That score should never happen in a game beyond the first round, right?
No.
That is a first round 1v8 matchup type score. That should never be happening in the second round is a 2v4 matchup. But the Lightning are just that good this year. And, I picked them to go all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. I picked them to lose, but I picked them to go all the way to the Cup Finals. And it genuinely looks like the only thing that's going to stop them is themselves. The only thing that's going to stop the Tampa Bay Lightning is the Tampa Bay Lightning because everything is working. The defense is working. Vasilevsky is playing great. The offense is clicking. And they're getting goals from guys, like Andre Palat had a 2-goal game in this series. I think he also had an overtime winner. Like, it's not just the Kucherovs and the Braden Points and the Tyler Johnsons. And like you said, they're doing all of this without Steven Stamkos. Like, that's just how good this team is.
And now just imagine how much better it's going to get when Steven Stamkos comes back into the lineup.
Yeah, and that's just going to boost their power play because their power play has been kind of just It's not really been as effective without that one-timer on the side. But, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of things that the Lightning are doing right. And the Bruins, this really does feel like a passing of the torch type series to me. Where the Bruins are saying, okay, you're now the guardian of what is considered a Stanley Cup champion. Because for the longest time in the East, the team you looked at to be like, this is, the standard of what a Stanley Cup contender should be, it was the Boston Bruins. And it really does feel like this is a passing of the torch to saying, well, this now is what a Stanley Cup contender needs to look like.
I mean, it'll definitely look that way if the Lightning get all the way to the final and win. I mean, people have been talking about the Lightning for a long time. Like you said, they did play for that Stanley Cup in 2015, but they never really, I don't know, I guess they never really clicked in the playoffs. They've been like the Washington Capitals for so long that the Capitals would have these incredible regular seasons and these great, individual seasons and then go nowhere in the playoffs. And we saw that last year with the Lightning with their 62-win season, 120-point season out of Kucherov, and they lost in 4 games. So I think this is just symbolic that like this Lightning team isn't who anybody thought they were. Like they are that fast, skating, dangerous team on offense, but I think what's really surprised the Bruins is, like you said, how physical they've been, but their willingness to engage the Bruins first. It's not like they're responding to the physicality of the Boston Bruins. They went out there and engaged the Bruins in their game and still managed to beat them.
Yeah, and they brought on several pieces that are specifically designed to do that. Like, obviously, a guy like Pat Maroon, Blake Coleman, with the addition of Kevin Shattenkirk, Zach Bogosian. These are guys that are specifically meant to be physically engaged and to initiate that kind of contact, which is something that the Lightning had never had in previous years. It was always these fancy-dancy, skill guys that they were adding in through trades in the offseason and signings. Whereas this season they looked at it and they were like, look, like, we just got beaten by a team who only really had one superstar in the Columbus Blue Jackets, which at the time was Artemi Panarin, and obviously it was Sergei Bobrovsky, but they had one superstar who wasn't in the net, and we have like 4. But they just outworked us, so we need to get better at outworking our opponents. And they bought on several pieces that were just designed to do that. And, I don't want to ever count out the Boston Bruins ever, but it's hard for me to see the Bruins beating the Lightning in 3 straight. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, if the series was even at 2-2, I'd say, all right, yeah, I still feel comfortable with the Bruins being able to pick up 2 out of the next, 4 games and win, or next 3. But having to win 3 straight against the Lightning just is tough. And I was just thinking about, like, the Lightning really are what the Toronto Maple Leafs should be.
Yeah.
they have all the same star power up front, yet they can defend and, I don't know, do everything the Maple Leafs can't. And they can actually play offense probably better than the Maple Leafs can.
I think one of the big things is that the Lightning's anchor and their star on defense is a defenseman in Victor Hedman. I mean, their focal point on defense is a lockdown defenseman, a Norris Trophy candidate for his defense type guy. I mean, look, he's no slouch in your offensive zone either. The guy can put up like 50 points easy. But that's not what he's best at. And the Lightning star player is a defenseman. They have Shattenkirk and Bogosian, who Shattenkirk has realized he's not going to be like the 40-point St. Louis Blues Shattenkirk's. Like, he's settled into a more physical role. Bogosian has settled into a physical role. He has always played with an edge. And they have supporting cast of players on defense who can put the puck in the net, a la Mikhail Sergachev. But as opposed to the Toronto Maple Leafs, who their star anchor is an offensive defenseman, and they just surrounded him with other offensive defensemen. It's like, wow, so you had a glass of water and you just poured more water on top of it. Like, you didn't do anything. Whereas the Maple Leaf or the Lightning was like, oh, you had a glass of gin and you poured some rum into it, right?
Right.
Like, you added something different. So do you have any final thoughts on this series? Or do you think it's I think
it's kind of closed, right?
Like wrapped up in a bow. It's not over, obviously. It's never over with a team like the Boston Bruins. It's just hard for me to see, with how well this Lightning team is playing, them losing 3 games in a row.
Yeah. But if any team could do it, it would be the Boston Bruins.
Absolutely. I mean, they are Stanley Cup contenders for a reason.
President's Trophy winner.
So we'll switch over to the other series in the Eastern Conference. The New York Islanders are up 3-1 on the Philadelphia Flyers, which I'm very surprised at, because in my bracket I actually did pick this matchup to happen, and I actually picked the Philadelphia Flyers to win this matchup. I sent the Flyers to the Eastern Conference Finals against the Tampa Bay Lightning. I'll get your thoughts on it as a non-Islander fan, and then I'll go into what my thoughts are. But what have you seen from this series? Same kind of thing. What are the implications of it? What does this mean? Just your general thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, I guess a lot of the little red flags we saw against the Montreal Canadiens ended up being a lot bigger red flags than we thought they should have been, than they were for the Philadelphia Flyers. Namely, that their big guns still really aren't scoring. I mean, I still think Claude Giroux is goalless or has one goal through these playoffs.
I don't think he's scored yet. Yeah, he hasn't scored in the Islanders series. I know that.
So so then he's got 0 goals in the whole playoffs. Then so it's just, and the Islanders kind of are just proving to everyone that they're the team that this is the team they should have been all year. They've just played a lot of really structured defensive hockey, and they're making the most of the opportunities when they get them. I mean, they've been very opportunistic, and the Flyers just look like they kind of don't know how to respond. Like,
yeah, I mean, the series to me, it so far has really just been the Islanders being the Islanders. You know, the Barry Trotz tight defensive system. If you give up, if you're down by more than 1 in the third period, that's very scary, because, to borrow a phrase from Anthony Stewart, the Islanders just park the bus in their defensive zone and like nothing gets through. It's very scary to be down late in this game. And I was thinking about this before the series. To beat the New York Islanders, there's a couple things you have to do. You have to play ahead. You cannot play from behind against this team. It doesn't work. Very rarely will this team blow multi-goal leads. But also, by the same token, it's difficult for them to come back from multi-goal deficits. It's not impossible, like we saw in Game 2. They came back from a 3-0 deficit to tie it, to go to overtime, where they ultimately lost in overtime. But you need to play ahead of them, play ahead of the sticks, force them to play an open game that they don't want to play. Like, if you're ahead of them late, you force them to open the game up, which they don't want to do. You have to generate on the rush, because their defensive structure in the zone is so good that you have to get those odd man rushes and you have to convert on them. And you need to force the special teams, because 5-on-5, their expected goals against is incredibly low, and their actual goals against 5-on-5 is, I think, like first in the league. So you have to force them to play on the penalty kill. You have to draw penalties against them. You have to force those 4-on-4s that they don't want to play, because they're too structured to play 5-on-5. And we saw the Flyers do a lot of that in Game 2. And the other big thing for the Flyers is, like you said, their big guns just are totally invisible. I mean, Claude Giroux is not even goalless. He's just totally not noticeable. Voracek has been noticeable, but still can't find the back of the net. Kevin Hayes got 2 in Game 2, but since then has just been kind of been okay. Travis Konechny, haven't really noticed him at all. And the strength of this team coming from the back end hasn't really been noticeable either. And Carter Hart's been good. He's been really good for them. I mean, he's made some incredible highlight reel saves. But the structure of the Islanders is really what's prevailing them in this series right now, and they're up 3-1 as a result. And then really, this could have been a sweep. Had they won Game 2 in overtime, this really arguably could have been a sweep.
Yeah, and I mean, the Flyers have done a lot of what you said they had to do. I mean, they have been playing ahead, or they've been playing even most of the time, which is not where you want to be. But they've also proven that playing ahead, they can't hold a lead. In the only game they've held a multi-goal lead going late into the third period, they blew it. And they were blowing smaller leads to the Canadiens a lot. So again, like, it's a lot of these small red flags that I guess are now real issues that I guess we were kind of only attributing to them maybe looking past the Montreal Canadiens, and now here they are up against a team that's arguably very similar on paper, and they're just not. The game they want to play isn't conducive to beating a team like the Islanders, that like long stretch pass skating like hockey game, and that's where the way their coach AV really likes to play the game, and the way they've had a lot of success this season mostly doesn't work if the team makes the neutral zone an absolute swamp and you can't get those long passes through. So it's just, the Islanders are just incredibly effective at, snuffing out a play before it starts, and the Flyers just don't seem to have an answer for the Islanders' defense.
Yeah, and again, I don't want, this series to me, if there's any, you know, light at the end of the tunnel for the Philadelphia Flyers, it's just that their top guns haven't been producing. So this series isn't over, obviously. No series down 3-1 is ever over, but there is that little lifeline that if Giroux can get going and he can go and put in a goal or two next game, if Kevin Hayes can find another 2-goal game in him, if they can get something out of Voracek, if they can have Travis Konecny find the back of the net, if their top guns were producing and they were still losing, that's harder for you to overcome. Because if you're losing games like 3-4, and Giroux has 2 goals and assists, you really can't ask for much more out of them. But the fact that they're still in these games, and they're in these games late, without their big guns, is something for them to say, like, look, if we can just get these guys going, we could probably take back control of this series. The question is, how do you get them going at this point? How many different line combinations can you really try before you look at it and you're just like, listen, like, there's just nothing's working here.
They really just don't have an answer for the structure of the Islanders. I mean, and it's not like AV's teams haven't come back before, right? They did it 2 years in a row when he was with the Rangers against teams that arguably they should have lost to. I mean, they did it to the Washington Capitals, and they did it. I think they did it to it might have been Barry Trotz's Washington Capitals. They did it too, but it's just I don't know. The Islanders just they look like the team from November and December, and not the team from January.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, health played a huge role in that. Like, Adam Pelech being out for the entire season really, really hurt the defense and really hurt the structure, because he's probably the most underrated defenseman in the NHL at this point. Just how much defensive value he brings to the ice. And you saw when he went out, the system was totally different. And that's not to say anything bad about, Johnny Boychuk or Noah Dobson or any of them, but the system just wasn't the same without the Pelech and Pulock pairing. And obviously losing Cizikas, that's a huge blow. That's your fourth-line center, your top-line penalty killer. He's the guy that goes out there for every important defensive zone face-off. He's a real crutch for Barry Trotz, so losing him hurt. So, I mean, this is just showing that, healthy New York Islanders, this team is just very dangerous. Now, for the sake of argument, should the Philadelphia Flyers lose this series, is there anything specific you think they need to do in the offseason to address these issues, or do you think that this is just a regroup and maybe come back next year and just kind of chalk it up to, like, unfortunately your best players went cold at the wrong time?
I think you just bounce back next season and try to I mean, they're young. The only thing is they're old. Some of their forward pieces are a little older, but that being said, it's not like they're too old that 1 year is really going to do them in. So I think going forward, they
the Lightning and the Bruins game on right now for Chara and Kucherov. We're just face down on the ice next to each other, and we're not really sure what was going on.
But yeah, I think this is just like a regroup for the Philadelphia Flyers. I don't think there's any real issues. I mean, maybe ending up trading Gostisbehere for a forward of some kind might be an interesting idea to explore for them. But that being said, I really don't see a reason to force anything if you don't have to. You got a good young core, and you've got a great goaltender. So
yeah, I mean, maybe you could go out and try to get, like, a pure goal scorer. Like, obviously Jacob Voracek is a good goal scorer, but maybe you go out and try to get, like, a pure goal scorer, somebody like in the vein of, like, a Tarasenko type guy who's just out there to put the puck in the net. Maybe balance out that top six a little bit, but other than that, I mean, this is a Flyers team that I was very high on at the start of the season, and clearly coming into the playoffs, I was still very high on because I put them all the way through the Eastern Conference Finals.
I mean, they're trying to nuke my bracket right now, too, so it's okay. St. Louis Blues already did that, so.
Yeah, I had the Blues going all the way to the Western Conference Finals, so.
Yeah, so did I.
But yeah, I mean, going ahead, if we kind of like spitball a little bit and looking at an Islanders Lightning matchup, like that'd be really interesting to me. I still think the Lightning would win that. I've been doubting the Islanders this whole playoffs. I mean, you always doubt your own team, right? Like,
yeah.
You're always cynical about your own team, if nothing else for the emotional stability part of it.
You never want to get your hopes too high.
Right. I mean, and Islanders fans can be forgiven for that, since if they go to the Eastern Conference Finals, it'll be the furthest the team has been since 1993. But that being said, it would be an interesting matchup for sure. And, oh my God. So, we were watching the game, like, so Storchara just clanks Kucherov right in the face with a high stick. And then as he's complaining to the referee, he gets a shot right to the side of his knee.
That's a whole big yikes for everyone involved.
I still think the Lightning would win that. I just think the Lightning are just too good, and they have the star power that the Islanders don't. The Islanders have really good players, and I think Matt Barzal qualifies as a star in the National Hockey League, but they don't have the star power that the Tampa Bay Lightning do. It would be a good series. I think it would be a good test for the Tampa Bay Lightning, a real stress test to see what can they do against a very, very structured team. But that's all speculation. That's assuming these teams win their 3-1 series. So we'll go over to the Western Conference. We'll start with what I think is probably the easier matchup to dissect, which is the Vegas Golden Knights and the Vancouver Canucks. Obviously, Vegas holding a 3-1 series lead over the Vancouver Canucks. I guess I'll start with this series. I just think that this is just a veteran Stanley Cup contending team, not bullying a younger team, but just kind of like flexing their muscles and being like, well, we deserve to be here. Not that the Canucks don't deserve to be there. I think the Golden Knights are where the Canucks are going to be in like 2 to 3 years.
It's really just a good test for the Canucks, honestly. Like, it's just they're learning from a team that's done it, that's gone all the way to the Stanley Cup final, what it takes to get there. And like we said, the Vegas Golden Knights are a very experienced group, and they just know what it takes to win, and that's playing a big part in it. I mean, it's not like they're manhandling the Canucks for long stretches of the game. The Canucks are pretty much in these games. It's just
a weird series because the Canucks have been shut out twice, which is just very strange to me. And I think that's, just the Vegas Golden Knights just having a really balanced team, really good goaltender. Robin Lehner's been playing great for them. And they're kind of just taking away the bread and butter of the Vancouver Canucks, which is the plays on the rush. Like, they're shutting down those plays on the rush a lot. They're really paying attention to Brock Besser, Bo Horvat. Those guys are having a really hard time finding the back of the net. One guy that's looked really, really good is Quinn Hughes. I mean, he's just been absolutely fantastic for the Vancouver Canucks, and he still has through this whole series. I mean, he played a really, really spectacular play to Tyler Toffoli for a goal the other night in Game 4. But that being said, it's just kind of the case of the Golden Knights are a complete team. There's no holes in the roster, they're just a veteran team that these guys have been all the way to Stanley Cup Finals. They know what it takes to get there, and the Canucks are learning from that. I also think that the Canucks also suffer a little bit in the size department. They're not built to play a team like the Vegas Golden Knights. The Golden Knights are big, heavy. Even their top 6 forwards like Mark Stone and Max Pacioretty are bigger guys that like to throw the body. Obviously, you have guys like Alec Martinez and Ryan Reeves. I just think that the Vancouver Canucks will eventually acquire those kind of blue chip pieces on their bottom 6 to help balance out their physicality that they're severely lacking in their top 6. But other than that, I mean, this is really just, like you said, the Canucks are just playing with house money at this point. Like, losing this series doesn't really mean much to them.
I mean, they went out and stunned the St. Louis Blues, so I mean, and that's the defending Stanley Cup champions, so it's not like they haven't already had a learning experience, but like having to play 2 of those teams is a lot to ask any team who hasn't been there before. I mean, an unproven team has to go up against 2 big veteran teams. who, for all intents and purposes, should compete for Stanley Cups every year, it's a big order. And the Canucks are just proving that they're falling just short, but like there's nothing to be ashamed of. Like there's nothing, like there's a lot to hang your hat on here. And the most important, which being you took down the Stanley Cup champion in 6 games?
Yeah.
In the opening round of the playoffs. That says a lot.
Yeah, they really took a lot of big steps this year, and it just, perhaps if they had beaten a team like, say, the Colorado Avalanche in the first round, which is more of a skating series, they might have more of their legs about them this series, but they had to power through a very tough, very big St. Louis Blues team, and then you go up against a very big and very tough Vegas Golden Knights team. It's almost like you push the first boulder out of the way, and then there's just like a second boulder in the way. And it's just like, I don't have the strength to do this anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the fatigue factor is real. I mean, like playing back-to-back very physical series is going to be taxing on anybody, let alone a bunch of young players who've never done it before.
No, for sure. And like we've said, they'll be back. I mean, they're too good of a team not to come back and be... I don't see them competing for a Stanley Cup next year, but maybe 2 years from now, they acquire more of those tough, bigger bodies in the bottom 6. They round out the top 6 a little bit. Their younger guys get older and more experienced. And there's no reason why this team shouldn't be getting better.
I agree.
And Vegas Golden Knights side, I don't really think that you take out a lot out of this series. I think you just say it as like, we're beating a team that we really should be beating. And that's not to take the Vancouver Canucks lightly. Like you said, they did knock out the St. Louis Blues. But for all intents and purposes, this is a team that a team like the Vegas Golden Knights should be beating in 5 or 6 games.
Right. Easily.
So going to the final matchup in the Western Conference, which is the Dallas Stars and the Colorado Avalanche. And I guess the big question on everyone's minds, similar to the Boston Bruins, is this series different with Philip Grubauer? Or is this just the Dallas Stars finally showing everyone that they are Stanley Cup contenders?
I mean, these games are still dramatically uncharacteristic for how we would expect the Dallas Stars to be winning them. I mean, they're essentially playing shootouts every night. I mean, what was it, 5-4 last night after being up 3-0?
Yep.
But that's kind of characteristic of how they beat the Dallas Stars. Not the Dallas Stars. How the Dallas Stars beat the Calgary Flames. They played a lot of these wild shootouts where they went down 3-0 and then scored 7 straight. And so maybe we've just been wrong about the Dallas Stars is kind of the question, more so than were we wrong about the Colorado Avalanche. And to answer your actual question, I don't know if there's any different with Philip Grubauer in the net. I mean, Colorado just doesn't look the same, I guess. But not for nothing, running through what is essentially wet, paper mache in the Arizona Coyotes, which really put up almost no resistance at all to them. Maybe it wasn't that great of a test. Maybe we would have seen a little bit more out of them or gotten a little bit more of a stress test against the teams, like a team like the St. Louis Blues had they had to play them in the first rounds. Maybe we would have seen a lot more of these like early warning signs, whereas, you go in and tear apart the Arizona Coyotes and then you go into the next round feeling great. And
yeah, it's hard to really get anything out of that series.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this series is any different with Philip Grubauer. First of all, because I don't really think the gap between Grubauer and Francouz is that big. I mean, granted, look, nobody wants to lose their starting goaltender. Totally understand that. And for all intents and purposes, these games, for the most part, are pretty close. They're 1 or 2 goal games. So you might argue, Grubauer might have had one of those goals and we'd be tied going in overtime. Or he would have stopped a couple of those goals, we would have won the game. I just think the Avalanche don't have an answer for what the Stars are bringing to the table. And the Stars are tied with the Vegas Golden Knights as of the recording of this podcast for most points from the back end in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and which we said was a strength of the team. And it just seems like to me like the wingers of the Colorado Avalanche just don't have an answer to that. I don't know if it's the structure. I don't know if they just don't have the wingers to play one-on-one with the defensemen of the Dallas Stars. I don't know what the answer is. But whatever the answer is, Jared Bednar's got to find it quickly because they're down a 3-1 hole. And again, really, you don't want to count out the Colorado Avalanche ever because you have Nathan MacKinnon and Mikko Rantanen, Gabriel Landeskog, and Cale Makar. It's just hard to see this Dallas Stars team not finding one more game to kind of put a few soft ones past Francouz and win the series, you know? And it's, you don't want to blame Francouz because, look, it's not fair to him at all. All of a sudden, Grubauer injures his groin, and now you're playing the Dallas Stars with no warm-up at all, who, for all intents and purposes, the Dallas Stars are Stanley Cup contenders. They took the St. Louis Blues last year to Game 7 overtime, and they're a very, very good team. So it's not fair to him to expect him to come in, because he's not Philip Grubauer. I don't think the gap is that big, but he's just not Philip Grubauer, so you can't expect him to be Philip Grubauer all of a sudden. That being said, I don't think the series is any different. I think it might be 2-2 right now instead of 3-1. I still think the Dallas Stars would ultimately come out on top. Like I put in my bracket, I do think the Dallas Stars would ultimately come out on top, even if with Philip Grubauer in the net. Maybe it goes 7 or 6 games instead of the 5 that is looking like right now. And it's just hard to say because, like, what does this team need besides goaltending in the Colorado Avalanche? Is that it? Do they just need a goalie?
It's honestly, I mean, like, yeah, the goalie is the big question mark, right? They need to fill that hole in the net. But I think the rest of it might be just the young guys that are in a lot of these positions just might have been, you know, they didn't know what they were bargaining for. Because, like, for instance, they only made the playoffs last year for the first time. And then this year and last year, you know, you have a Dallas Stars team that's very experienced here, a team that, like you said, took, you know, Stanley Cup champions to Game 7 overtime last year. So this is a Dallas team that, like you said, for all intents and purposes, should be competing for a Stanley Cup, and in a lot of people's eyes was a Stanley Cup contender at the beginning of the season. Then a lot of inconsistency and this and that. And I mean, not for nothing, they're doing it with their backup goaltender in net. They have Anton Khudobin because Ben Bishop's been out since, what, Game 1? Or Game 2? So, I mean, the goaltending thing isn't, if anything, maybe having Grubauer makes it a little better for them, but the Dallas Stars are doing this without their goaltender. If anything, these games might be even more commandingly won by the Dallas Stars if they had Ben Bishop still.
Yeah, and that's not to take anything away from Anton Khudobin. It's just the simple fact of Ben Bishop is a perennial Vezina candidate. And again, that's not to say that Khudobin's not good. He's an elite backup, but an elite backup is not a perennial Vezina candidate.
I mean, Ben Bishop is probably... There's probably a few goalies that are, like, you know, tough to score against. Ben Bishop's probably one of the hardest goaltenders to actually score against in the National Hockey League just because how big he is. And then add on top of that, like, his just pure ability at the position. It's just having him would be make the whole series probably look a little different if you're the Dallas Stars. They might be willing to play the games a little more wide open than they have. But I mean, why would they? They've had a lot of success this way.
Yeah, and like I said, this series is by no means over. Because you can't count out Nathan MacKinnon. Because if they just go balls to the wall and Jared Bednar is like, look, guys, we know we're not going to get the defensive stops that we need. Just go out and do what you can in the offensive zone. We're just going to have to score our way out of this jam. If there's a team that can do that, it's the Colorado Avalanche. Like, up and down the lineup, just loaded with goal scorers. So if there's ever a team that can just score their way out of a jam and maybe get Grubauer back, I don't remember what the timeline of his injury was. It's the Colorado Avalanche, but with Francouz in net, I just can't see the Stars not finding one more 5 or 6 goal game and just putting the series away.
I mean, they seem to be finding a lot of goals right now. They were finding a lot of goals with Grubauer in the net anyway.
True. Very true. I think it was 1-1 when he went down in game. The series was 1-1 when he got hurt in game 2, or game 3. I don't remember when he got hurt, but
yeah.
So if there does end up being a Stars Golden Knights Western Conference Final, who do you see coming out of that one?
Dallas Stars probably.
It's funny because the Stars and the Golden Knights are 1-2 in points from the back end, which is interesting from the Golden Knights, but
I just think I hate the Golden Knights, dude. I just continue to bet against them because I think the teams they keep running into outside of maybe Dallas and Chicago, these other teams in the Central Division are just so much better than them that like I'm not gonna bet on them over a Central Division team in almost any situation.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And we talked about this at length last podcast. We won't get that deep into it, but for all intents and purposes, they are a complete team. There's really not a huge hole in this roster. And yes, they are Stanley Cup contenders, but I don't know. Against a team like the Dallas Stars, I feel like they're not going to be able to physically bully the Dallas Stars because the Stars are a big team. I mean, even guys like Jamie Benn, Radulov, Pavelski, Perry, like these are grit and grind guys. They're not going to be bullied. I mean, their back end might be a little bit more fleet of foot, but you still have guys like Jamie Alexiak,
Esa Lindell,
and Esa Lindell, who are like they're bigger guys, so you're not going to bully them. And if it comes down to who's got the edge in net, you'll probably say the Golden Knights just because Robin Leonard is playing fantastic for them. The back end edge definitely goes to the Dallas Stars. I think the Stars defense is better than the Golden Knights. And then up front, they like to score a lot of the same type of goals. They like to score these grimy, like get to the net, power forward type goals. You know, for all intents and purposes, you know, your Mark Stone, Max Pacioretty, Paul Stastny combo is your Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, Radulov combo. They're very, very similar up front to me. I just think the Stars are going to go, like I said, all the way. I put them to go all the way in my bracket. And I see no reason as to why they shouldn't go to the Stanley Cup Finals this year.
I don't either. To be honest, not with the way they're handling the Colorado Avalanche right now.
So are there any last-minute notes or anything that you want to hit on before we wrap things up?
I don't think so.
So we'll try whenever the second round wraps up, which, I mean, could be tomorrow. I think, if I remember correctly.
There'll be a couple days off between whenever the second round ends and the conference finals all start because all the conference finals are in Edmonton, so they'd have to go and they probably wouldn't have to like quarantine or anything because they're in the bubble and going into another bubble.
They'll probably have them quarantine for a couple days and then administer another set of tests. And I'm assuming that they're all going to be flying private planes.
Oh yeah,
they're going to go straight from the arena to whatever private airfield they have. You know, they're going to be doing all of this stuff, you know.
The NHL's probably got all the arrangements already made.
But yeah, so the second round could, for all intents and purposes, be over tomorrow. So we'll see. Obviously, we'll have to look at the schedule whenever the second round ends, because if the second round goes on longer than tomorrow, we'll have to see when that ends. And we'll do, you know, our third round predictions based on, even though we just kind of did them.
Yeah.
We'll talk about our third round predictions and, you know, ultimately our Stanley Cup predictions thereafter. But I think that's it. I mean, it's a very weird Stanley Cup playoff so far. No series has been a sweep, I don't think, right?
But no series has really been that close.
No series has been a sweep, but no series has gone 7, which is very strange. We had one series in the qualifiers go 5. Other than that, it's always been these middle grounds. It's been 5 or 6. It's a very weird Stanley Cup playoff so far.
And it looks like whatever team is winning game 3, so they split game 1 and 2. They win game 3. Whatever team is winning game 3 seems to then just roll over the team for the next 2.
Actually, that is a question I did want to ask you before we wrap up. Kind of like a little, just hockey sense question. Do you think that the reason that we're not seeing a lot of 7-game series is because these are all neutral site games? And so what I mean by that is, say, for example, a team is down 3-2 in the series, right?
I know what you're saying. And, say they come back, you have to come back to Madison Square Garden to fight for your life, right?
Right, so, if the Rangers did not have home ice advantage, right? And Game 6 would be at Madison Square Garden. The argument there being, you get the boost from the home crowd. You find that last bit of energy to squeak out that Game 6 win, and then you go on the road for Game 7. Do you think that there's something to be said for all these teams playing in neutral sites where it's just coming down to none of the X factors of
I mean,
motivation from a home crowd or getting that home win?
You're
or
getting
anything
what
like
is
that?
essentially just like straight hockey, right? It's like whatever team has more skill is essentially coming out on top. Not even more skill, but is either has more skill or is just better structured is coming out on top. And you're not getting a lot of these wild X Factor Cinderella runs. Like, Montreal would have been a significantly tougher opponent if those games were being played in the Bell Center with 21,000 screaming Frenchmen, and Yuppie going absolutely with setting up a full send in the corner. Like, it would have been nuts. And by the same token, the Flyers would have been absolutely crazy because Broad Street would have went nuts. So there is something missing, and I think there something to be said for that. But that overall, I don't think it's like a detriment to the integrity of the tournament or anything. I mean, the better teams are just winning, and it's kind of like the world's greatest travel ice hockey tournament. We all, you and I didn't play in any of them, but like we know plenty of guys who did, and it's like, sure, you could have a really good team, and you guys might win a lot of games like in front of your family and stuff because that's your crowd. But the second you go traveling to a rink that you don't know, sometimes like teams just come out and dust you. Like, whoever's better is just going to come out on top because there is no X factor. There's no boost. It's just you guys go out there and you have to play, and you have to play them straight.
Yeah, and we saw a lot of upsets in the qualifying round specifically, but since then, it's almost like the opposite of last year's playoffs, where last year, like, every top seed was getting just canned in the first round, whereas this year, it really does seem like the top teams really are playing like the top teams. And I was one of those people, like, when this whole thing first started, like, I had questions about the quality of hockey that we were going to see. And I don't have those questions anymore. I mean, the quality of hockey has been nothing short of spectacular. To me, this generally, it's never going to feel exactly the same as, a Stanley Cup playoffs where you have home crowds, obviously. But I think this is as good as we could have possibly asked for in the current situation. So to me, there's no question about the quality of hockey that we're seeing.
In terms of quality of hockey, it's actually interesting. I read an article yesterday that was talking to an NHL scout. Like, because the team scouts, some of them are still in the bubble and they're watching the games because they have to. It's their job. But he was saying that the quality of hockey, or at least the consensus among scouts, is that the quality of hockey we're seeing now is generally the hockey that we're usually seeing in, like, November, December, when teams have hit their full stride and are playing. So, I mean, yeah, playoff hockey is probably the best hockey in the world, but, like, in terms of the overall quality of it, this is really, like, what playoff hockey would look like if there was no fatigue factor after an 82-game season. These are the freshest, best teams in the league, just showing up and going like, all right, let's do it, and going at it. And it's made for some, I mean, some not so enjoyable series. I mean, the Vegas Chicago series was kind of a stomp, and like it wasn't like, particularly fun to watch. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I tuned out every time the Blackhawks went down a goal. I kind of tuned out because the game was over.
Was pretty much over.
Even when they had leads, I stopped watching because I knew they would blow the lead anyway. But there also have been some really exciting series. Like, I mean, St. Louis, Vancouver was cool. That's an upset, but St. Louis had issues and didn't have the goaltending to make up for those issues this year like they did last year. And
I really enjoyed Flyers Montreal. I thought that was a really fun series.
I think the Canadians scared the hell out of the Philadelphia Flyers for a second there. I think they really did strike the fear of God into them. Like,
after the first game, you were like, all right, like the Canadians can't score, like they're not going to be in this series. And they go and blow them out 5-0 in game 2, and then in game 5 they force game 6 with a Herculean effort there. I thought that was a really fun series. Really, to me, the only series since we've gotten to bracket, not counting the qualifiers, because there's a lot of really fun qualifier series, but really the only two series that I've just had like very little interest in was Arizona, Colorado, because you saw the writing on the wall. It was either Darcy Kemper makes 50 saves or they lose 7-0, and that's kind of what happened.
He'd still make 50 saves and they'd lose 7-0.
And Chicago, Vegas, just because Chicago I don't really think should have been where they were, even though
the Oilers wouldn't have fared any better.
No, they probably would have maybe squeaked out 6 because McDavid would have just went like Super Saiyan, but
So
Other than that, though, like I've enjoyed most of the other series.
all of the series have been interesting. There's been something about them, and granted, the games have only gone so long, but
And it is weird not having any game sevens yet. But I imagine, as you know, the best teams come out of this next round, I can't imagine that both conference finals are going to be 5 or 6 game series. There's got to be a 7-game series in there somewhere.
there's got to be a 7-game series in one of these somewhere.
These teams are just too good not to play 7 games.
But I think it's kind of like what we said. We were saying is like now that like the gap in talent is closing between these teams, I think the series are obviously gonna get tougher. And because there's no X factors, like no team is coming in riding high after upsetting a team and shutting them out in their building. It's like, all right, we just got off a plane from Toronto to Edmonton, and now we have to play. And it's like, it's just gonna be whoever the better hockey team is gonna win, and that's it. And that's kind of how it should be. I mean, not to say that I don't like regular playoff hockey, but like in terms of overall people complaining about the integrity of anything, like it's the most pure form of hockey you can kind of get, if you ask me.
No, this is, like I said, I was one of the people that had questions coming in saying, I wasn't sure, was there going to be an asterisk next to this Stanley Cup, run? Was there going to be those people that are like, it doesn't really count? But really, after the qualifiers, all of those doubts were washed away because we saw significantly high level hockey really was the thing. So I have no doubts in my mind. This to me is as legitimate as any other Stanley Cup playoffs. There's no asterisk next to this for me.
The status of fans in the crowd shouldn't determine whether or not this is considered a legitimate Stanley Cup, because these teams still had to win 16 straight games, or not 16
Some of them
straight.
19.
Yeah, they still had to win. They still had to go through a slog to do it. So it's just as legitimate as every other Stanley Cup.
It's not like, the top 4 teams got to bye into the second round, and then the first round was all these qualifying teams. It's like, you still got to win 16 games.
The other thing is, what was I just gonna say? It was there and then it's gone. I totally lost the train of thought.
But yeah, so and I don't think there's going to be any sort of asterisk next to this.
The shortened seasons. We don't put asterisks next to the Stanley Cups on teams that won in the shortened season.
It was
2012 and 2013 and 1995, 94, 95. The Devils won and the Blackhawks won. We didn't put asterisks on them because guess what? Those happen to be really good hockey teams that went on to win more Stanley Cups after that. So there's no reason we should put an asterisk on this, because these teams also had to go out and win 16 games against some of the best teams in the league.
And that being said, really any of the 8 teams that are left, you could easily see them being multi-time Stanley Cup champions. It's not like, and it would have been cool to see a Stanley Cup like Cinderella run of like the Montreal Canadiens, the 12th seed, run it up to the Eastern Conference Finals. But, if, for example, the Montreal Canadiens won the Stanley Cup this year, you could make the argument like they're not going to repeat. They're not actually that good of a team. They just got hot at the right time, right? Teams that are currently playing, you could easily see being multi-time Stanley Cup champions.
And one team in here has played in 3 Stanley Cup finals already. The Boston Bruins.
So, yeah, I was one of those people that voiced those concerns. I don't have them anymore. I think this is as legitimate as you could possibly ask for in the year 2020. And I'm just excited to see what happens going forward.
It's the most normal, least normal hockey you could get, right? The quality of hockey is the most normal, and it's great. Everything else about it is totally bizarre and strange. But listen, I don't care how bizarre the league is, as long as I get like NHL quality ice hockey to determine a Stanley Cup champion.
Which is what we've got so far.
Right. It's not like the MLB, which has been iffy quality from a lot of these teams.
Well, you also have like half of some MLB teams like getting COVID, so it's
yeah, or opting out, and
so I think that's it, right? You want to wrap it up on that note?
That's pretty much it, yeah.
So I want to thank you guys for watching. Like I said, whenever these second round series wrap up, me and Steve will get together. We'll figure out what we want to do. We'll start previewing the next round, talk about some wrap up stuff, and yeah. Other than that, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys again